Hey there, my name is Stefan Voigt and I'm a freelancing artist for art direction and 3D animation. This means I use the computer to create virtual worlds which can then be utilized to stage products and create visually stunning movies. So for example, I create car commercials, trade fair visuals, TV openers or explanation pieces of complex products, like for example a robot's spine surgery or even how a spaceship could bring people from Germany to Australia within 90 minutes. Here on my website you can see a few examples of my work. On top is a quick cut together of my best work which will give you an overview of what I do. To create all of this, I mainly use Maxon Cinema 4D, which brings me to the project I will present today. Maxon and Intel invited me to create a CPU-heavy scene to flex the muscles of Intel's new Xeon processor. Quixel Megascans also joined the team and provided me with access to their huge database of realistic 3D scans. Okay, so let me show you the end result first, and then I will talk about how I utilized all the tools to achieve this. A bit weird, isn't it? The concept of this piece was of course just creating a demo scene with all the cool features you can use in Cinema 4D. But my thoughts behind this was that the planet-like ball is some kind of organic, terraforming machinery that has landed on our planet at the beginning of time. It has all the elements inside of it that are needed to create our world how it is today. And somewhere hidden in the mountains, this gigantic sphere still pumps its magical energy into our planet to keep our ecosystem alive. Pretty far-fetched, I know, but that was my background inspiration to create this. Now here's the amazing thing Intel made possible. You can actually download this scene. With all the 3D scans, the plans, shaders and all my setups. You can take it apart, take a look at all the assets and check out how I created different things. So below this video you should find a link where to download the scene file. Or just visit my website where you can find everything about this project. Alright, now I will guide you through the different stages in a project like this. I divided this into pre-production, scene creation, lighting and rendering, post-production, and finally encoding and sharing the movie. In the pre-production phase, you mainly think about what do you want to do. You scribble out concepts, collect things that inspire you, and test which visual styles would work best for you. In my case, I already knew that I would use the Quixel Megascans. So I browsed through the vast database and finally decided that I want to use the 3D scans of Iceland to create my scene. Which brings me to the first important step of pre-production: references. When you want to create something that's supposed to be photorealistic in the end, you have to make sure you know as much about it as you can. You have to make sure that if your scenery is in Iceland, you also have to pick the vegetation that lives in Iceland. As you can see in these pictures, there are no big trees and also no raspberry bushes or dandelions, for example. We humans have a strong subconscious knowledge about where certain plants grow. Mushrooms are more in the shade where it's moist, for example, and some plants don't grow close to trees or only like it where there's water. If you mess things like that up, your picture won't look fake right away, but to the viewer something still will be off. He might not be able to pinpoint it, but something is not realistic in this scene. And that's probably because deep in his subconsciousness, the viewer knows plants don't grow in this area, so it feels somehow unnatural to him. So, reference is key. Since 3D animation is a rather complex task, it's important to figure out a lot of things before you head into production. For this, there is a task called R&D, which stands for Research and Development. Here you figure out which tools you use and how you solve different problems technically. For me, this was more of a playground with a volume builder, where I tried out a lot of different things. Here I copied a few setups together that led to this sphere as you can see it in the movie now. For example, you can see a weird grid over here which could be used as a fruit bowl or something, but I never used it. My initial concept was to use the mushroom scans of Quixel, but then I decided to do a landscape shot, not a close-up, so I completely neglected the idea. And here I tried out different patterns. The main goal of R&D is to have small scenes that are fast and responsive. So you can try out different things quickly instead of waiting for the computer to finish calculations. That's why I just used a small cube to see if the combination of noises is pleasing to me, and then later on I transferred this pattern onto my final object. During research and development, you get a lot of cool ideas and get to know new work approaches, which then can be used for other projects. So after the project was over, I said, okay, I have to do something with those mushrooms. Then I took the time and created these stills where I basically recycled all the setups I didn't use. Here I could try out new color schemes and shading methods, and in the end created these weird dailies of trippy mushrooms. Alright, now for scene creation. In this step, you bring all the elements together that you want to use. In my case, I had to import the different rocks and plants. Then I had to generate the geometry of the layered sphere and also build a setup for the sticks that float around the sphere. Let's start with the rocks. With Quixel Megascans, it's quite easy. You just select one of the rocks from the website and then download it to your hard drive. Or you simply use the Quixel bridge to import the assets into Cinema 4D. Now that I have the asset in my scene, I can use an HDRI to illuminate the rock. I can also rotate the virtual sky and therefore change the way the light hits the rock. Just one little pitfall here. When you're using physical renderer, you have to make sure to subdivide the geometry. Otherwise, the displacement texture doesn't work properly. But this is only important if you're using the physical renderer. Every render engine handles data differently, so make sure you look up how to use 3D scans in the engine you're working with. Now I can place rock after rock in my scene until I've created the landscape I'm happy with. After that, I can select polygons on which I want to scatter plants. For this, I'm using a MoGraph cloner setup that makes use of the polygon selection. Right now, all the plants have the same size and are facing in the same direction. I can fix this with a random effector, which varies scale and rotation. Now, let's talk about the floating sphere. When starting out placing all my rocks, I felt like these rocks could hold something, especially this one here on the right. It seems like a crater where something ages ago crashed into it and shaped this formation. So my initial thought was just to put something round in here, like a force field or something like that. I just wanted to block out the basic shape and then see later what I will create in detail there. And in the end it got a bit more complicated and I created something like this. And I also adjusted the general size to make room for the debris floating around the sphere. So now let's take a look on how I created a structure like this. In here you can see all the static geometry. But if you go into this null, which is called volume creation, there you can see all the setups I used to create the moving geometry. As an example, we will pick this one called Spirally. So I will take this setup and take it over to a new scene to show it to you. Here we are in a smaller scene, and I created this setup in two steps. The first step was just to create these layers, and the second step was then to create a noise on one of those layers. So let's just pick this layer, and for the sake of speed I will delete the other ones. And now let's take a look what's in here. As you can see, there is a setup called Spirally Base, which is the first step, and then another setup which is called Spirally, with a shader field, and the shader field is responsible for the weird noise that's happening. So let's check out the first setup. It's just an intersection of the sphere and a cube. And if I disable everything, you can see it's just a cube that's getting displaced by this displacer. And if I hit play here, you can see over time it slowly evolves and changes its shape. So as you can see in the volume builder, I just have the sphere and the null where the cube is inside. And at the end I added an SDF smooth just to get the corners very round. And as you can see, I'm here with the voxel size of 1.5, which is quite high, but since I have such a powerful CPU, it doesn't matter so much. But just to speed things up right now, so we don't wait so long, I set it to 3, and then I activate the volume builder again. As you can see, it's calculated quite quickly, and if I turn on the mesh, it is quite dense. Okay, so far so good. Now I want to export this as an animation and then re-import it to do further operations on top of it. There's a super cool feature in Cinema 4D where you can just click on any object and say bake as Alembic. And in the meantime, we can see what the CPU does. And just look at this madness. So many cores, it's unbelievable. And as you can see, it exports quite fast. On my old machine, a project like this wouldn't have been possible. I would have needed to wait so long for results and the feedback would be so slow that I just wouldn't have done it this way. But with a CPU like this, new things are possible and it's a lot of fun to use. Okay, now we have our alembic, which means we don't need this anymore. And as you can see, now it plays back quite smoothly. Now for the next step, I can use this object inside of the next volume builder, which looks like this. You can see 2 times I have the base shape, and then I do multiple operations on top of it. Just for the demo, I will use the old geometry, then I don't have to replace all of this and change it back and forth. Alright, here's the result. So I picked the base shape, then used the shader field. The shader field creates a noise, and this noise is then generated into this volume. Please keep in mind that you can choose your creation space. You can either create your noise inside of a box, or like I did, in the volume of the objects below, which is this one. In the next step, I used the same base shape, but shrunk it with those 2 dilate and erode functions, and then subtracted the whole thing again. So this was the magic trick to make it actually hollow. Now we're entering the stage of lighting and rendering, where all the cold and gray geometry becomes colorful and gets the right materiality. This is where you decide, should my geometry look like it's a rock, made out of plastic, or even metal? This process is referred to as shading, or simply creating materials. And it goes hand in hand with lighting. When lighting your scene, you basically have to work like a photographer. You have to decide where to put your lights and also what kind of lights to use. You can decide if your scene should be like a photo studio, or if you go outside and use the sunlight like I did. Then starts the rendering, where you give all your material and lighting information to the render engine, which then calculates for you how the lights hit your rock, for example. The render engine also calculates where the shadows will fall and how warm or cold the light will look on your object. All these calculations usually take a lot of time, and the more detail you put in your scene, the longer it takes to make all these calculations. So here it comes in handy if you have a fast computer. Less waiting time guarantees a faster output and a higher level of quality. Since this project is a demo scene for Intel, I wanted to stress the CPU a lot. Therefore, I decided to use Cinema 4D's built-in physical render engine, which includes the Intel Ombre engine. The Ombre engine provides ray tracing algorithms that are optimized for Intel CPUs and also has performance-optimized ray tracing kernels for photorealistic rendering applications. The physical render engine also brings some amazing features when it comes to atmospheric effects. By now, there's also a great denoising feature, which you should definitely try out. To light my scene, I used one of the amazing HDRI images of HDRI Haven. Check it out, the quality is great and they are free to use. Here you can find a lot of different lighting scenarios which you can then transfer into your 3D application. I chose this one for my scene and I took the sky out of this one to put in the background of my landscape. Here you can find my lighting setup. And as you can see, for the sky I just used a background plate, where I just cropped out the sky of the HDRI I showed you earlier. And all the lighting is done here by this GI sky, which has this HDRI in the luminance channel. And most of the magic happens in this one here. Now, with the physical render engine you get some amazing atmospheric effects. I used atmosphere and fog in here, and let me just quickly demonstrate on pictures what both of these do. So this is a rough preview rendering of my image. And as you can see on the floor, there is a bit of mist or fog happening. And also in the distance, the air gets more blue as it does in reality. And these are 2 separate effects. And the effect is seen the best when I simply turn it off. And now you can see quite well the difference this little effect can make. But wait, there's more. Check out what happens when I turn off the atmosphere. It's a completely different lighting. The atmosphere effect is super important when you have a huge landscape like this. The last step before the delivery is the post-production. This is where you either combine your 3D generated images with live action footage or further enhance your image with effects. For my project I chose After Effects, and here you can see the few things I've added. Since I knew that my project would be a demo scene that people can download and examine, I wanted to create a scene that already looks great when you just hit render. Therefore my post-production is really minimal. As you can see, if I disable all these effects, the picture doesn't change that much. I just sharpened it a bit after, applied magic bullet looks, which I like very much, and then did some basic color adjustments. And in the end, I added some grain. After that, I just have to add the soundtrack, and then I finally can render out a movie file, which I can then share on the internet. For simulations and rendering, a fast CPU is absolutely necessary. The faster the artist gets results, the more iterations he can create, which leads to a higher quality product in the end. As I said before, with my old workstation, this project wouldn't have been possible or would have looked very different. Very often I could already work with the final voxel size instead of having to estimate my results with previews. Cinema 4D is a very versatile tool to create scenes, as it is very easy to use and allows for great flexibility to bring different elements together. As I said, my favorite part of the physical render are the atmospheric effects, which allows for photorealistic results on render time. With this, Cinema 4D also minimizes the work that has to be done in post-production. The Quixel Megascan library is a great tool if your goal is to achieve photorealism. I was surprised by how fast you can put a scene together and how easy it is to make it look great. Thanks to the great combination of low-resolution geometry and high-detail displacement maps, I could render a realistic landscape while keeping my viewport fast and the scene file size down. I would like to thank Maxon, Intel and Quixel for this initiative and giving me the tools to create this project. It was a lot of fun to explore these new ways in speed and creativity. With this, I could reach further and push beyond the limits I have faced before. Alright, that concludes my presentation. Now, go to my website, download the scene file and start playing around. I wish you lots of fun with it. Thanks for watching and see you soon.